Yeah, we're good to go. Good to go. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Here we are again, continuing with Kalu Rinpoche's book, Profound Buddhism, which is an interesting kind of overview of the Vajrayana. He had two other books in this series. One's called This is Profound Buddhism, which is teaching how to deal with emotions from a self-liberation, a conventional Mahayana, and the Vajrayana point of view. Includes teachings, this volume includes teachings on the nature of the mind, the relationship between mind and body, emptiness, compassion, and the situation of the individual in the cycle of existence and karma. So he has another book in this series called Secret Buddhism, which is the essentials of Vajrayana mantras, empowerments, the 6 yogas of Naropa, Chud, Pure Land, and the 6 bardos, history of the Kagyupa and Shangpa lineages, and some explanation of the principles of Tibetan medicine. So it's a survey of the Vajrayana, in addition to this survey of the Vajrayana. So a little bit about Kalu Rinpoche, for those who may not know. A Lama of the Kagyu Shangpa lineage, again, 12 different sublineages within the Kagyu. Ka means speech, Gyu means secret. So it's like the esoteric tradition that comes from the Buddha Vajradhara, then directly to Tilopa, and then to the Indian scholar Naropa, from there to Marpa, this Tibetan layperson who traveled across the Himalayas to get the teachings. And then he returned and eventually transmitted the teachings to Milarepa. So it was in that tradition that the Kagyu arose. And again, 12 different Kagyu schools, very, very similar, of course. But at any rate, Kalu Rinpoche, a Lama of the Kagyu Shangpa lineage, born in eastern Tibet, that's Kham, in 1904. He studied and practiced with many great beings of all traditions before living in a solitary retreat for 12 years. One of the first Tibetan masters to teach in the West. He passed away in 1989. So we are in the extraordinary Mahayana part of the book, Vajrayana, Tantrayana, Mantrayana, has different names, but Vajrayana, and he's starting out on compassion within the Vajrayana. So those of you who have the book, I'm on page 67. Compassion, a link of kinship with all beings. Love and compassion must not be parceled out to any one particular person, but should be applied to all beings. Such universality is possible if we are conscious that there is no being who has not been our father or mother in one of our past lives. Treading in the cycle of existence since time without beginning, all beings have had birth numberless times in the course of innumerable kalpas. The result is that each being has been a father, mother, son, or daughter of every other being. The Buddha is omniscient and possesses, by definition, the knowledge of all phenomena, of all past, present, and future times. This omniscience allows him to assert that one can count the particles of matter composing the ground of a vast country. But it is impossible to count the number of times that each being has been in the situation of a father or mother for all other beings. When they were father and mother to us, how did they act on our behalf? They expressed the same kindness as our parents have shown us in this life. From birth until adulthood, they have given us all that we needed with much love. They chose for us the best things, food, clothes, care when we were sick, education, and so on. All beings in the course of numberless lives have acted in the same manner. Continuing to wander in the cycle of existence, they were born in difficult and painful situations that we cannot possibly imagine. So that's the introduction to compassion, a link of kinship with all beings. Then samsara is comical. Katyayana was one of the direct disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha. Having reached the state of an arhat, he possessed some psychic powers. One day he was begging for food, and he saw a young woman seated on her doorstep. While cradling her newborn baby tenderly against her breast, she was eating fish. When she finished eating, she threw the fishbone at a female dog that had watched the food and yelled to chase her away. But because of his powers, Katyayana was able to see the karmic bonds uniting these four beings: the woman, the baby, the fish, and the dog. The fish was none other than the father of the young woman. He had died a few years earlier. The baby was a person with whom she had maintained reciprocal hatred. That person also had passed away a few years previously. As for the dog, it was the reincarnation of her mother. The woman ignored these relationships. She never dreamed that she held an enemy close to her heart, ate her father, and violently rejected her mother. Katyayana said, eating her father, abusing her mother, and cherishing her enemy, samsara is a strange show. And he burst into laughter. Lamatarchan said once that, samsara would be very funny if it weren't for the suffering. And, it has that, with this view and eventually with this understanding, it's like great comedy is because things are kind of turned upside down. Comics are wonderful and so healthy for all of us because they're always exposing the falsities, exposing the assumptions that we have. And that's the source of the humor. Things are somehow different than they appear to be. Now, universal compassion. We can never know the karmic links in the immediately preceding life that bind us to people with whom we now have a close relationship. We can only be certain that all these beings have been our father and our mother a great number of times, and for this, we remain greatly indebted to them, gratefully indebted. When we see someone poor, sick, or in a miserable condition, let us remember that this person has been our father and mother many times. With mind obscured by ignorance, this person does not know this. Because we know, we have to seek all means to relieve this person and develop as much love and compassion as we can for him or her. When we see a young person, happy and in good health, although we know that this being was once our father and mother, we may think our compassion is not needed now. However, compassion is not something to feel from time to time. It embraces the totality of the situation of all beings. The person who is young and happy now will inevitably be affected by the suffering of change. He or she will become sick, suffer, and die. This person cannot be excluded from the field of our compassion. Older people were our father and mother at one time or another. Granting great importance to this life and world, they may have devoted all their forces and attention to them. Now they no longer expect anything but illness and death. Perhaps they have committed in this life many negative acts that will produce much suffering in their future lives. Our compassion must help them avoid suffering as much as possible and establish them on the path of awakening. Powerful and wealthy people of this world are often excluded from the field of compassion. They too have been our fathers and mothers. Their present situation is the result of positive acts accomplished in past lives. Their situation is not necessarily enviable because it does not lack danger. Indeed, the Buddha said, "The place of power is also the place of negative acts. The place of wealth is also that of greed." These negative acts and greed will mature in future existences in the form of suffering, whether it is in the hell, hungry ghost realm, or when beings resume a painful and miserable human existence. Powerful and wealthy people deserve our compassion, and we must seek ways to help them to avoid future sufferings. Universal compassion. This shows, for Buddhists, universal compassion is not just a mere concept. There seem to be a lot of people running around these days talking about universal compassion, but it always seems to exclude some people. This image of, even though if we can't see it, to even practice that way, practice as if that stranger was your mother or your father. And then good to think about, all the things that a mother has done, how we survive. There's no one who survives without, a modicum, at least 9 months in the womb. So Jigten Sumgin says somewhere that even a bad mother has somehow brought about this perfect human birth, this precious human birth, this ideal platform from which to attain Buddhahood, to liberate ourselves. So it's such a radical concept, but such a powerful one, because it's at the same time not just conceptual, but it's so practical. Because good grief, what isn't more down to earth than a mother, changing diapers, feeding the baby, being the target of all its upsets and slanders. A granddaughter, for instance, the little one, looks at me all the time and says, "You funny." And I say, "You funny." She says, "No, you funny." Now, loving our enemies. We also meet people seeking to harm us, showing aggressiveness, or simply being unpleasant. Our usual reaction is to reply by manifesting anger or aggression. But this is a wrong reaction. The person who acts now as an enemy has been our father and mother many times in past lives. Due to the mind being obscured by ignorance, this person cannot recognize this fact. Because of negative acts accomplished now, because the person cannot liberate himself or herself from the cycle of existence, this person will have to continue enduring innumerable sufferings. Recognizing that this person has been our father and mother, instead of displaying anger, we feel compassion and do anything in our power to liberate this person from suffering and make him or her happy. Animals living on earth, underground, or in water have a very difficult existence and suffer in all kinds of ways. All have been our fathers and mothers a great number of times. Negative acts committed in past lives have imposed on them their present existence. Not only do they suffer, but their mind is inhabited by all passions: desire, attachment, aversion, blindness, greed, jealousy. They are incapable by nature of generating faith, compassion, and spiritual intelligence. They also must be included in our compassion. Most people live in a family structure as members of relationships that include the father, mother, husband, wife, children, brothers, and sisters. It is not rare that family relationships are stained by misunderstanding and quarrels. If we are beset with these kinds of difficulties, let us recall that those with whom we do not get along now have taken care of us with attention and love as our parents in past lives. Previous karmic links have forged present family bonds. If a member of our family gets angry at us or chooses to quarrel, let us reflect. He or she is angry because of not knowing the real link uniting all beings. I am fortunate to know the Dharma, knowing also that he or she has been my father or mother, I will not respond by anger. On the contrary, cultivating patience with love and compassion, I will seek ways to make that family member happy. Developing compassion, we must do the following. With the body, avoid killing or creating suffering, but act with softness and kindness. With our speech, avoid criticizing others, being contemptuous, being slanderous, and using humiliating words that hurt or threaten, and instead speak with kindness. And with our mind, avoid malevolence and develop benevolence and the sincere wish for the other's happiness. Now he moves on to 4 kinds of giving. Compassion is expressed by 4 kinds of giving: material giving, giving of security, giving the Dharma, and giving of love. Material giving consists in giving to those who are in need, food to those who are hungry, clothes to those who have nothing to wear, and so on. Giving security applies to those who, being unable to protect themselves, need the help of another, such as sick people, endangered animals, and so on. Buying live fish and releasing them in water is one of these kinds of giving. Giving the Dharma is practiced when, having real knowledge of the Dharma and motivated by great compassion, we are driven to help others. We can explain various aspects of the spiritual life, such as the difference between negative and positive acts. We explain the necessity of abstaining from committing negative activity, accomplishing positive activity, and so on. It is the highest form of giving, but we must understand all its implications. For example, I now talk to you in order to teach you. If I teach with the thought that some time without beginning you have wandered in the cycle of existence, undergoing innumerable sufferings, and have, because of karmic potential, much suffering to experience in future lives, and if I think it is necessary that I help you to liberate yourself from it, this motivation will make the teaching beneficial to you. It will also be an opportunity for me to accumulate great merit. If I teach without compassion, but for financial interest or fame, I doubt this will be useful to you. Even if it is useful to you, I would not experience any benefit because of my perverted motivation. This applies to material giving as well as to the giving of security. When we practice giving only with the wish of helping, we experience great benefit contributing to the attainment of awakening. Practicing giving for one's self-glorification and fame will be the only reward and will consume all the benefit of the generous act. Then, giving love takes into consideration the suffering of all beings. The cycle of existence is composed of 6 classes, each marked by a particular suffering. Hell beings undergo immense torment inflicted by unbearable cold or heat. Hungry ghosts suffer from hunger and thirst that they can never satisfy. Animals have limited intelligence and are driven by instinct to devour each other. Human beings undergo pains of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Demigods are prisoners of their own quarrels and conflicts. Gods, at the end of a very long life of pleasure, suffer in seeing themselves falling into inferior realms. Now, when Zhiravka was here just last month, the weekend on the meditation was on Tonglen, the taking suffering and giving happiness, and that's the next section of the book right now. Taking suffering, giving happiness. When we practice giving love, we should think of the ocean of suffering, not only of the suffering we experience now, but also of the suffering imprinted in our karmic potential, which will actualize in the future. Then we imagine that all the suffering, faults, and veils covering the mind of all beings take the form of a black light that we breathe in by the right nostril. It dissolves into the emptiness of the heart. We imagine that all beings are liberated from this suffering that we just took within ourselves. Then we imagine all the qualities, all happiness and joys we have taking the form of a white light that we breathe out by the left nostril. This light envelops all beings and they become perfectly happy. Our practice continues for a certain number of breathing cycles during this visualization. But what is the real effect of such a meditation? Do beings towards whom it is directed truly receive its benefit? In fact, this meditation allows us to develop a positive mental attitude, decreasing our faults and veils and increasing merit and wisdom, which ultimately lead to awakening. Once awakening is reached, we may effectively establish an infinite number of beings in states of happiness and really liberate them from suffering. The effect is not immediate, but this meditation on giving love surpasses a mere act of imagination. This is something that strikes me again with the down-to-earthness. Buddhism combines this, Guru Rinpoche said it's like the vastness of space, but with the particularity of very fine flour. So it combines that, the vastness and the immediacy. It's true to have these good ideas of love and all beings being happy. This act of imagination is a positive thing, but to actually do something about it, and with your own body and your own breath, much more powerful. As we are ordinary beings, we have strong feelings of ego. I exist. It is me. Because the idea of me is strongly anchored within us, it is possible that, in practicing a meditation during which we imagine ourselves taking on the suffering of others, we would fear harming ourselves. We would prefer not to practice this type of exercise, or would practice it only with reticence. But this would be a mistake. On the contrary, we must fully dedicate ourselves to it by thinking, what I want is to effectively take on myself the suffering of all beings, liberate them from it, and endure it alone by myself. Meditation of taking the suffering and giving happiness produces benefits for the meditator in this lifetime: longevity, absence of sicknesses, and the realization of wishes and projects. Ultimately, it contributes to the attainment of awakening. If we practice this meditation with self-benefit in mind, we totally falsify this practice. During meditation, we do not need to envision the results, but we practice with pure motivation for the benefit of others. And this wanting to anticipate a result, is this veil that keeps us from experiencing the vividness of our own mind right now. The sense of ego is so strong and habitual and unexamined that it's like we think things have to pass through the ego in order for it to be effective. But actually the opposite is true. Now, emptiness and compassion. When we understand the notion of emptiness of the mind and realize what it means, the mind by itself expands in joy, happiness, and freedom. We see that ordinary beings, not perceiving this emptiness, think in terms of me and I exist. This mistake makes them accept all phenomena as real, and they experience all kinds of suffering. The compassion that we conceive for them is all the greater because we perceive the foundation of the mechanism of suffering. Understanding emptiness and compassion sustain each other. Now, the painful condition of animals. Hell beings and hungry ghosts endure terrible torment. The karma that engenders this type of existence and our own are too different for communication to be possible. We cannot see them, and this is why we sometimes doubt their existence. The greatest number of beings constituting the class of animals are also invisible to us. However, we can see a certain number of them. We can observe them, peaceful or fierce, living on earth or in the water. All of them have only limited intelligence, but animals of the oceans and rivers, fish and crustaceans, seem to have an opaque mind and very limited mental capabilities. Nevertheless, they are not free of desire attachment. On the contrary, it is very powerful among them, and most particularly in connection with food. This allows fishermen to catch and kill them. Finally, aversion drives them to kill and devour each other. Mental opacity, desire attachment, and aversion are the three poisons that cause much suffering for them. With body and mind, they experience, just as we do, suffering and fear. However, animals hardly possess ways to protect themselves, and no one thinks about protecting them. Their condition of existence is the consequence of bad karma accumulated in past lives. It is an act of great compassion to protect them by releasing captured animals that are put up for sale in the marketplace, destined to be killed and eaten. Releasing them in their natural habitat will preserve their lives. To do this, even for a few days or a few weeks, is greatly beneficial. We may use 3 methods in addition to material giving, such as giving spiritual benefits. By reciting for the released animals mantras and names of the Buddhas. Simply hearing this has the power to lead them to liberation. by giving them sacred substances to eat. It is said that touching these substances with the mouth will be sufficient for animals to avoid birth into inferior realms. They will be established on a path ultimately leading them to awakening. By spreading sand consecrated by recitation of mantras on their bodies, this contact prevents falling into inferior realms. These three methods are called liberation by hearing, liberation by taste, and liberation by contact. The scope of giving assistance is ultimate as well as temporal. He gave this in a talk in Hong Kong, it says, in 1986, this particular passage here. Interestingly, in Chinese Buddhism, this animal releasing is very popular. I saw once photos of a Chinese master in San Francisco, but he had somehow raised funds and had some sort of, it was like a tanker or something, this tremendous ship. And he had it all filled up with fish and then released them all into the harbor. But this brings up something else too for us, by reciting for the released animals mantras and names of the Buddhas. Simply hearing this has the power to lead them to liberation. It sounds so fanciful. It sounds like this can't possibly be true. How can this work? But if you think of the vastness of space and time, the number of animals that are out there, and for an animal to have the occasion of, because, they're sensitive to sound, of course, the vibration of the name of a Buddha, it's so rare that it's injecting that into their mind stream. And all of these things are causes and conditions. So the rarity of it, you can kind of see this is really remarkable that this animal, out of all these trillions upon trillions, somehow have contact with what? A mantra, this energy of the Buddhas, you might say. Who knows? Next is saving life. Human beings and animals have in common an identification with the me, the egocentric grasping. All have the feeling, myself, I exist. From this, fear, sickness, and suffering proceed. There are 10 negative acts committed by the body, speech, and mind. The most serious is taking life. It is said that the karmic result of this is to experience hell for a kalpa and then to be killed 500 times. The seriousness in suppressing life is as great as the merit of saving it. When we release animals, this merit is greater if we supplement it with spiritual protection by reciting mantra, giving consecrated substances, and spreading blessed sand. Now, a story. At the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, one of the many kingdoms of India was governed by the king, Lord of the Gods. He had in his court a skillful physician whose young and good-hearted son enjoyed walking in the countryside. One day, the son was hiking in the hills when, in the distance, he saw predatory birds flying in a circle at a low altitude. Approaching a pond on the point of drying up, he saw birds feeding on fish that could no longer find refuge in deep water. Completely moved by what he saw, he thought, these poor fish are going to die. What can be done? As fast as he could, he returned home and, telling his father what he had seen, asked him to solve the problem. The physician understood that it was necessary to seek help from the king himself. He requested an interview with the king. He told his son's story and of his solicitude for the fish, and in his son's name requested that his majesty intervene. The king was emotionally moved and ordered an elephant to be loaded with barrels of water for the pond, and that people recite the mantras and names of the Buddhas. However, later the pond dried up again because of a lack of rain, and 10,000 fish living there died. They were all reborn as devas in the sky of the 33 ones. Endowed with the power of clairvoyance, particular to their present state, they could see that the Buddha was teaching in India, descended to hear him, and understood the nature of mind. They then were curious about their past merit, allowing them to have been able to obtain such a fortunate destiny, being born as devas, meeting the Buddha, and receiving his teachings. Using their mental powers, they saw that in their previous life, they had been the fish that had received water and the blessing of mantras. To express their gratitude to the physician's son, they showered flowers on his house. Surprised, the physician's son wanted to know the reason for this outpour. He went to the Buddha and learned that the flowers were the token gratitude from the devas he had protected when they were only fish in a pond without water. I just love these stories. An association with fish. Kala Rinpoche, so there's a footnote here. It said Kala Rinpoche had great fondness for animals. He liked visiting zoos and would recite mantras for the animals that were there. He also liked to release animals. Whenever he had the opportunity, he released hundreds, perhaps thousands of fish, which he bought at the markets of Siliguri, a great city on the plains below Sanada in Benares and elsewhere. During his visits to Hong Kong and Taiwan, he released a great number of fish, shellfish, crustaceans, tortoises, and birds. Wishing that this practice be established on a regular basis, he founded an association in charge of collecting funds and organizing monthly releases of animals. So this, what we're reading now, is from a letter that was written on this occasion. Okay, an association with fish. To the attention of the benefactors and disciples of Taiwan who have faith and devotion. Any being considers its body and its life as very dear and is very attached to them. From this comes pain, fears, and suffering. If someone pierces us, beats us, and fatally injures us, how great our anguish and suffering. Animals do not harm us. Nevertheless, we catch them against their will, inflicting unbearable physical suffering on them and taking their lives. During many past lives, these animals have been our fathers and mothers. We ourselves now enjoy the results of previous virtuous acts, an existence endowed with certain freedoms and comforts. Because of this existence, as they cannot protect themselves, if we can rescue animals from death and suffering, we gratefully return the goodness of our parents in our past lives. Suppressing one's life leads to rebirth in hell during a kalpa. 500 times our life will be taken, then in return. During many existences, we will own a miserable and ugly body. Continual threats will weigh heavily on our lives. Saving only one being from death and suffering leads to rebirth for hundreds of lives as a deva or a human being endowed with good existence. We will have long life, good health, abundance of goods, perfect happiness, and joy. If, more particularly, we give animals consecrated substances that liberate by taste, sand that liberates by contact, and if we recite for them the names of the Buddhas and mantras, our rebirth will bring longevity, physical beauty, a pleasant voice, great wisdom, wealth, and good friends. Our wishes will be granted. We will be born in a pleasant country, free of all threats, and we will encounter the Dharma. At the moment of death, we will endure no suffering of agony, nor fall into inferior realms. We will live in harmony with all beings, and finally, we will be reborn in the land of bliss. Benefits are unlimited since they ultimately lead to awakening. All this was explained by the Buddha himself. With faith and great compassion for defenseless animals, birds, baby birds, fish, tortoises, and all sizes of animals, we offer the 4 kinds of giving: giving of the Dharma, giving of love, giving of material goods, and giving of security. Wishing them the best at this time will be beneficial not only for them, but for ourselves. We will obtain in this very life longevity, health, wealth, and the abundance, the absence of obstacles. In our future lives, we will obtain the same benefits that we have granted others. It is useless to entertain hope or doubt concerning this subject, since the law of karma is inescapable. Therefore, I ask you to undertake this virtuous practice, whose consequences for oneself and others are now mundane and ultimately bring benefits and happiness. By becoming a member of the association, releasing from inferior worlds and by working on its behalf. Can you imagine if we had people found Dharma centers here? What if we founded something just for just releasing all the animals? It would be a challenge. It'd be a wonderful thing, but it shows you the kind of, the positive cultural momentum or inertia, you might say, that this was spoken in Taiwan also. This there. I mean, there's been people criticize that, people can do all sorts of things for limited reasons. We're all mixed up with our ego. So you're doing some generous thing, and then to some degree, it's the effect is somewhat lessened because our ego gets involved, but it's still positive happening. And so that's, I've heard that criticism of Oriental cultures too. I mean, similarly, there are people who do it because, not liberating others, but wanting to have a better rebirth, pure and simple. So it's just the challenge of being a human being, one way or the other. But to have the teaching there, the attitude of this is so enlightening also, because, truly and generally in our culture, better I think it used to be, but no one's thinking about the animals. And in many ways, we still don't. But to have this kind of thought, and again, injecting the Dharma into it. I mean, liberation by taste, liberation by sight, liberation by contact, by touch. Some of you may remember when we were out in the old retreat land, and someone, I think it was Becky, brought her old dog, who was starting to fail a little bit, arthritic and that. And Gar Rinpoche had a little medal of Buddha Amitabha, and he was flicking it back and forth with the sun so that it was reflecting, the light was reflecting into the dog's eye. And I thought, really, how rare. And when you see the teachings that underlie this, you can, someone like Gar Rinpoche, you definitely have a feeling that this is really true. And that commitment, to take the time even to do that in the midst of all these other responsibilities, I think is very inspirational. So that's a good place for stopping this week too. The next section in the Vajrayana is common preliminaries. So now we'll get into the 4 outer Nandros, precious human birth, impermanence, karma, and cause and effect. Oh, I never said cause and effect. What's the 4th one? Yeah.
Frank, I just wanted to thank you and just speak to the idea that culturally sometimes it's hard to buy a tanker full of fish or whatever and release them. But I think what we do in our society as just lay people, like just going to the shelter and rescuing an animal from fear and then exposing that animal to Dharma is like super important. Like, and for me, it's been a spiritual practice since 2008. And like, I know that my animals, when they go, they're at peace because they've been exposed to the Dharma and to the altar. And, they would hop up on the altar sometimes and drink from the bowls and everything. And they do respond, and they become quieter on the bed. If you say mantra aloud, they just fall asleep and they're totally calm. And it really does make a huge difference in their lives and the quality of their lives. And to take them from where they were and then to show them the Dharma it's a tremendous gift for people to do.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing. And even sort of less structured, or even, the awareness of animals. So, instead of just mindlessly stepping on an earthworm after a storm, for instance, to even remove an earthworm from a path of danger, it's that mindset. And what strikes me so much about this is that, in traditional Western religions, and animals are just like forgotten about. No one's thinking about them at all. And we got one person in 2,000 years, Francis of Assisi, who did some, prayer to the animals. A wonderful thing. But to realize that this is a profound spiritual practice instead of just being, so much of ours is sentimentality, and it's not that. It's not that, because you're actually doing something for the animal. It's not about our own sentiments. So that's a wonderful thing. You can see too, in a little way, what you were speaking of. You made me think of this, feral cat that appeared in our place. It took so much time before we could touch it. It was just, started out by hiding for 3 days. I didn't even know where it was. We just noticed the food was disappearing. We put out at night. And then, you'd see it, it'd be off across the room looking at you like this, and trying to bribe it with a toy or something like that. And it wanted to play because it was a kitten, really, just a big kitten. But yet, I'm not going there. And so you see the inherent fear that they have. And they have to. I see it outside now. The habit is so strong because even if I act towards it, it knows I'm total friend, but it takes off as if there's danger, So there's this very strong fear, and why not? Good grief. There are hawks out there. I saw some horrible thing on the internet of some, big, it was an African stork of some type, but, eating some giant frog. And I just thought, the animal realm, here's this frog kicking its legs while it's going down backwards. It's so brutal. But somehow to take that and our natural kind of abhorrence of that, and that it becomes our practice. That is a remarkable thing. It's just because the Dharma is not dualistic, we can approach it with dualistic sounding teachings, love for others, yeah. We don't have to pretend that there are no others out there. Instead, because I see mind as being an other, well, then I practice love. That's the connection between the two. So there's a oneness there, even if we don't realize it fully. Like you said, this leads to awakening. So it's profound. But also the use of, the suffering of animals to impress upon us on our actual situation. This, to me, again and again and again, we're just talking about reality here. Buddhism is just a very extensive way of presenting practical methods, and that are always talking about things as they are. It's not a belief system per se, although belief is obviously involved, just like you have a belief in physics. So there's this interaction between a Chinese monk and his teacher, and they had a very ritual kind of thing where, I don't know if it was every morning or just one morning a week or something, but everyone had to have an interview with the teacher, private interview with the teacher. So it was his day, and he came into the space that, getting some privacy there, and he told his teacher that on the way in, there were two crows pecking at a dead frog. And he said, why do these things happen? And the teacher said to him, for your benefit. Because without an awareness of suffering, we don't see the actual situation that our mind is in, and we're not motivated to do something about it. The greatness of the Dharma is that there is something that can be done. In my younger days, it's so incredibly lonely and fearful that this feeling there's nothing you can do. It just looks like just horrible. And then the rest of the world is walking around like they're asleep. It's really true. Awakening is the opposite of sleep. I'm thinking, why are you doing all this? You're just going to die. You're just going to suffer. This is a terrible joke. So, I don't know, the Dharma is amazing to me, because even the simplest thing like a crow pecking on a dead frog and the reaction that does to us, that's our practice right there. There's no separation anymore. It's really a wonderful thing, and so accessible. You start to get the flavor of this kind of true universality, true compassion, limitless. I remember I was at some sort of a camp when I was, where was I? It was after high school. I went to like a mountaineering camp in the Wind River Range, Wyoming. And, it was a full month, and, they were teaching you how to climb mountains and ropes and all that kind of stuff. And it was fun hiking around in this wilderness. And they were teaching, as part of it was a 3-day solo where they just dropped you off in the middle of nowhere. And, you had to sort of get through that. It's not so long that you're going to die without eating, but they taught you things that you could eat. There were snow lilies, I think they were called, and we had matches and things, so you could boil water, and it was like spinach or something. You just boiled a whole bunch of these things. You could eat them. Other people got more creative. I stayed away from the animals, but I just remember one day, not on the solo, but they were having that kind of training, And one day some of us were just sitting around in these logs, just like in camp. And this guy caught a chipmunk, I was watching it, he took his knife and just cut its head off. And I just couldn't believe the lack of feeling that he had, because there was no point. Again, if you're going to eat the chipmunk, I suppose, but nobody's eating chipmunks. But he did it. It was just kind of this pointless cruelty. And there was something so vivid to me about it, because in the scale of things, for an academic, it's not a big deal, right? I mean, how many beings are dying every day? But it was just the callousness of it that just struck me so hard. And of course, then you see it in your own life, you see the kind of things that we do, maybe not to that extreme, but, just ignoring some animal that's suffering or some other person. So I think that's one of the hardest things about the profound Dharma, is that we have trained ourselves in a way that basically we're avoiding suffering. And it's just so genius, it seems to me, that Buddha's first noble truth starts out with suffering. You have to confront that, because that's really what it's what we're dealing with all the time. We have this like unacknowledged understanding that it's all suffering. And so we're just constantly doing stuff, but why? To get away from suffering. And yet we're not doing it the right way. And part of that not doing it the right way is not wanting to really look at it, because it's too scary to contemplate it in that way. I heard a talk, just on the radio once, but by, I read it, it was an account. It was the comedian, Joan Rivers, tremendously successful. And her husband, I think she made jokes about him all the time. Edgar, I think was his name. He was her business manager, and a very skillful guy in business and that. So she had this, tremendous career. I mean, still does. But when he passed away, she had something of a crisis, because she said she realized her whole life, with all this success, she had this fear that like overnight it would just fall away. And so she was doing all this stuff, really her great creativity in that, but it was coming out of this fear. And I always kind of like that, because you see, no matter how successful, how wealthy, or however, we're still in the same situation. And are we dealing with it effectively or not? Yeah, courage. So anyway. Okay, 8:00. Anything else? Anybody, Dave?
Anybody out there on Zoom? Ask a question. You can unmute or type in the chat box.
With the survey, when we get through this survey, it'll be talking about the actual philosophic, you might call it. It's not really philosophic view, but it's the view that we actually have. And when you see, the discussion of the difference of the view between the conventional Mahayana and the extraordinary Mahayana, it's kind of mind-boggling. The Vajrayana is amazing, to be sure. So Kala Rinpoche is taking this approach of talking about how to deal with the emotions, which I think is very accessible to us and is really good. And then we start to get the feeling. And also from these teachings, you see that it's not something other than these great teachings of loving kindness and compassion of the conventional Mahayana. So I'm hoping that it's helpful to people. But at any rate, I love the pithiness of it, that, it's not kind of lost in too many words. He has all these different little vignettes, and hopefully that will be good for us in our discussion. Okay. We dedicate this evening, the merit of this evening, to all motherly sentient beings. May we always keep them in mind. Never forget that all those beings have been our mother, have been our father, and are us, them in all our lifetimes. And remembering their sacrifices and kindness, and the fact that in even giving us life, they did negative or limited things that cause them now to suffer in various ways. May we never forget, and may we lead each and every one of them to full liberation and to Buddhahood itself. Okay.